This is Angela from the Leadership Coach Group, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you today one of our coaches, Marie-Jeanne Juilland.
Angela, thank you so much for the introduction.
It is a pleasure to get to spend time with you today and learn more about you. I would love to learn more about your coaching style that you use when you're meeting with clients.
So I would say that my style is a combination of what I would call leading edge science and also pragmatism. So I'll talk a little bit about the leading edge aspect. So I've trained quite a bit in neuroscience, leadership, and also behavioral science. Like, how do we change our behaviors, which is not always so easy in challenging environments and under a lot of stress. Now, moving over to the pragmatic side, I will put on what I would call a consulting or advisory hat. And that's the practical side, because I've spent years building up my own business. I've also then been an executive on a team that was taking a fast growing company through an IPO. Some people say it's not the nicest image, but kind of have some of the tracks on my back from having done those things. And that I've learned some things that I'm always happy to share. And I like to focus on very practical, measurable business outcomes at the same time that we're building leadership skills. And if I could add one more thing, I think one other aspect of the way that I coach, I'll be coaching, it's going to be inner game and the outer game. So think of it this way: if there's something, you get some feedback or you realize I need to show up differently in a meeting. Let's say you're in a high stakes meeting, maybe it's a difficult conversation with a co-founder or with investors or your executive team, then we can practice ways that you could actually speak differently, manage yourself differently, right? That's the external. I call that the outer game. There's a feedback loop that comes in where it will impact your inner game. So what's your inner game? That's your beliefs about yourself, about how you're showing up, about what you can do, about what you can't do, all those things that kind of get in our way. Sometimes those stories that we make up about ourselves or about others. So we'll also work on that simultaneously, because that's kind of a loop. We'll work on both of those, and those help us understand our blind spots. And then one more thing I'll just add is that I'll often work with a leader. What I'll do is I'll go and do what I call 360 interviews, and I'll interview a lot of the key stakeholders that they're interacting with to get feedback from them, their perception of that leader. Because we have our own perceptions of what we're like, right? So what is your brand in the organization? What are your strengths? What are your opportunities for growth? And then I can put that together and I can give that feedback to the leader. And then we can work on that and check back with those stakeholders to see, are we really changing? Is this leader changing effectively?
Thinking of that practical side of it, I would love to hear some examples of opportunities for growth or challenges that you enjoy helping with the most.
Let me just say, I'm often working with leaders who are founders, co-founders, CEOs, or in the C-suite, or in a very senior executive position in companies that are growing fast or are already established. And these leaders are often very accomplished at their technical area. What they haven't mastered, perhaps to the extent that is needed now, is what we call the soft skills, right? Those are actually what I consider the hardest things to learn. Things like, how do I develop a bolder executive presence, right? And yet still be myself? Because at a certain point, you do need to step into that bolder executive presence as a leader. Another thing we might work on is, they might have a question about is like, how can I keep from avoiding that difficult conversation, right? With maybe my co-founder, maybe someone on my executive team, a really key hire, right? Also, why aren't all the key stakeholders on board with my vision? So how do I inspire? How do I influence there? Something else that I hear often is, let's say when I'm under pressure, how could I avoid saying things that I regret later? How do I onboard into this new position? Either at a new company, right? Or I've been promoted. So those are the types of things I work on with clients, amongst many others. And I would say one other thing I find a lot of leaders come to me with is they need a place where they can have the conversations that they can't have anywhere else, because it is lonely at the top. plate, you need a place where you can have a thought partner. So being able to work with a coach is a place where completely confidential, and that's the place where you can have the conversations and feel that you have a neutral partner.
I love that you brought that up, and having that neutral partner, and what an important aspect of a coach-client relationship that can be. As you mentioned, it can be very lonely at the top, and if you don't have others that you can talk with things about that aren't invested into it, your coach can make that great partner for you. And I know that sometimes that might even mean touching base in between coaching sessions, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So we could be having perhaps, let's say, 2 one-hour sessions per month, which is often common. But what I'll do is always have the door open. They can call me, they can text me, they can email me. So that can be really helpful. So absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out, Angela.
And I know that you understand what that's like for them when they're about to go into that important meeting. You've been there in that executive role. But I'm curious, what made you change from being in that executive role to saying, I'm going to do my own company and I'm going to focus on coaching?
When I was an executive, coaching was not as accepted, and it wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now, and understood the value. It was really reserved for perhaps just large corporations, the very, very top, C-suite like that. Now we're working with mid-sized companies, small companies, startups. And the reason that I moved from being an executive is that I thought, okay, I can now go back and do this for the leaders. It just makes me feel really good to be able to help a leader process these things, have a place, someone to talk with, and to deal with some of these really challenging things that leaders always face. So that's my why. I think one other thing too is I started out as a national business journalist, and I wrote about venture capital and emerging growth companies. And as I think back to that time, I think the things I loved writing about the most was really what made leaders tick. Why does a leader do what they do? What makes them tick? What could make them be a better leader and a better human being? Because I love to work with leaders who are courageous, who have discipline, and who have humility.
I love how you tied all of that back to even your foundation, and now you're paying it forward and you're being a mentor, you're helping others in their role and guiding them from your experience.
Yes, indeed. And let me just add that there is the mentoring, there's the guiding, and there's also, though, a huge business impact. And that to me is very exciting. One conversation around a critical decision can have a huge impact on an organization. So that also, having been in those executive roles, having had to make those decisions myself, it really excites me and makes me feel like there's significant value in what we do as coaches on the business side.
I definitely pick up on that sense of excitement that you get for being able to help make that impact on other companies and leaders, and that's awesome. I know that you live in California now, and tell me more about your background. Have you always lived in California, or where else have you lived?
I was born in Canada. That is not where I got the French name. Actually, my dad was Swiss French, and he grew up in Romania. My mom was from Poland. And so there we are. My mom's name was Maria. My father's name was Jean, hence my name, Marie-Jeanne. And I have lived in a number of places in the world, the US, Australia, Europe, back to the US. I did college, and then I've been in Silicon Valley for quite a while. I work with leaders here, but I also work with leaders in Europe. I work with leaders in Asia and in Latin America. Usually they are very interested in what I bring in my experience, having been a leader and a coach with some of these leaders in Silicon Valley. So that's something there that they're interested in. And then the other thing on the personal side I wanted to share is that I'm a proud mother of 2 young adults, and they are multiracial. My kids are Black and white. which means in the United States, they show up as Black. And so raising a young Black son, who's 21 right now, and a daughter who's 18, that also adds a certain level of, I guess it's a lens that I look at issues of diversity and inclusion, and also having been a woman leader. So all of that I kind of bring to my coaching and my background.
I love how passionate that you are on everything that you talk about. There's always a sense of excitement and optimism that I hear in your voice whenever we're talking. If you had to say what you're most passionate about or an interesting fact about yourself, what would that be?
I get the most fulfillment when I'm working with someone and I see that they have a big aha, right? Something where they have an aha about themselves and they get a greater confidence, a greater skill in understanding themselves as a human being, and then being able to translate that into leadership to help others in their organization. So that's really what lights me up.
It's always a pleasure meeting with you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Angela. My pleasure.